Welcome to the Stoughton Community Forum. We're honored tonight to have Senator Brian A. Joyce, who represents the community, Stoughton and Easton, to give us an update on what's going on in the State House. But before we start, I would just like to say a few words about Senator Joyce, who I think is one of the most outstanding state senators in Massachusetts. I had the opportunity, when I served as selectman for 32 years in the town of Sharon, to have some direct dealings with Senator Joyce. And he was a man of his word. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said, always looking out for the benefit of any citizen or any town that he represented. And it was a pleasure for me to be a guest host here this evening. So, Senator, welcome.
Well, thank you. That was very kind. I suspect you drew the short straw. That's why you had a host tonight and pinch hit for the regular.
Well, I was asked, and I said it would be my pleasure because you were really special to me and to the town of Sharon.
Well, there aren't too many people that can serve as a selectman for 32 years and leave on a high note as you did. You probably would have been elected for another 32 if had you chosen to. So, but you're kind to say the nice things about me.
You know, I believe in term limits on my terms, obviously. But, you know, you're here this evening to talk about the state update as it relates, you know, to the town of Stoughton and what's going on. And I have just some brief questions, you know, to ask that'll help you on, and we can just talk about anything. The past summer, the state Senate debated and passed the federal year 16 state budget. What are some of the projects and programs that were funded?
Sure. So I'm happy to talk about anything at all, frankly, but as it respects the budget, it's the biggest piece of legislation we pass each year, as you know, Norma. We have about a $38 billion budget, and not only is it really a determination how we spend the taxpayers' money, but also we set some priorities and hopefully, you know, reflect the shared values of many of the people in this district. And so we focus on the basics, you know, right? The almost half of state spending goes to health care, between the health care for the poor, which is the majority, and working poor, but also health care for public employees. Together, that's about half of all state spending. We spend a fair amount in returning to cities and towns, called local aid, as you know.
Local aid, Chapter 9, yep.
So here in Stoughton, we were able to get about almost $19 million returned to the town, and that majority of that, almost 15 million of it, goes to the schools. That helps keep pressure off the local property taxpayers, but allows the town to continue to invest in public works and public safety, but primarily public schools. You mentioned Chapter 90, that's the roads and bridges. Right. This year, I think Stoughton got in excess of $1 million. The Chapter 90 funding's increased quite a bit since you were in office. And this year, we even had an extra, I think, 100,000 plus for the town of Stoughton to account for the high amount of snow we had last winter to help offset the snow removal costs. So let me just backtrack. I view my job as having three essential components. The first is voting on on measures that impact everyone across the state. And I've risen into leadership. I've had an opportunity to have a greater impact on public policy. We'll talk a little bit about that. The second part is ensuring the communities that I represent in Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth counties get their fair share of the state budget, whether it's schools or roads and bridges. And then the third part is there are 170,000 people in my district, and those are the people for whom I work. So if they call my office, or increasingly now they email me, whatever the issue, I know it's important to them. So we try to get back to everybody within 24 hours. So you focused with your question on the second very important part of the job. For Stoughton, we were able to do some pretty good things, some in the budget, some outside. We've gotten the high school project. Stoughton has an old high school built in the 20s, renovated in the 50s and 60s. We were able to get that moved from really about 107th on the list, meaning the state wasn't going to provide any support anytime soon, up to 5th. In other words, if the local voters decide to support the local portion of the bill, the state will pitch in about 60, probably a little better than 60% of the cost for a new high school. So that would mean about $60 million in state funds to come into the town just to help, build a new high school. So there's a lot of different ways we help the communities, and Stoughton's done, fairly well in recent years, in my opinion.
Well, looking at yourself and my experience as you being, our state senator, my business was in Stoughton, for many years. Yet I served as selectman, in the town of Sharon, and we were close with Stoughton. You were open, fair, and able to adjust your time as a representative, to all these communities as our senator. And I feel very strongly that you were one of the best. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind. I have many years of experience of doing what I did, but you represented everyone fairly, in a fair and open manner. And that's hard, because when people ask a question, there are no stupid questions. There are stupid answers. Yeah. And we know that. And people think, well, a politician or politics and the media sometimes does a number on someone. But yet, your background, your history, your demeanor, and your truthfulness really stand out. And that is so important to every community, because they know they're going to get their fair share of your time and what you have to offer.
Well, let me just say, I think I want to talk to Roy directly, who's in the control room. Roy, I think Joseph is out as the host. I think we want Norman here every time that I'm a guest, because, my glory, that was awful nice of you, Norman.
Well,
Thank you.
I say it from the heart. If you tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God, the lies can't come back and bite you in the behind.
Well, those are the words my father told me, and my dear old dad will be 96 next week.
God bless him.
But he taught me a lot. I'll tell you a funny story. I actually, when I was in high school, my dad ran for state representative, and there were the number had just been reduced from 240 to 160, and he was running against a guy who had been in office for 12 years and had a lot of money and knew what he was doing in terms of running a campaign. We didn't have a clue. And it was my father, and I have 7 brothers and sisters. I'm the baby. And we just went out and we knocked on every door, and we get up at 1 o'clock in the morning and leafleted every town, every house in the district with a smiley face, homemade, good morning, please vote for. And we were winning, a huge upset, until the last precinct came in about 2 o'clock the next morning, because they were counting them by hand. And my dad lost by, I think it was 179 votes out of about 13,000 cast or something. And I was crushed, but I was also hooked. And I learned a lot from him. And about 18 years later, Mary and I had bought the house next door to my parents, and we had children of our own, and felt like the schools were getting shortchanged, and there were always these divisive Prop 2.5 overrides because the state wasn't paying enough for the schools, and young people wanted the local taxes up, and some of the older folks didn't. And I got increasingly involved and said, we're not getting our fair share from the state. And I ran for office. I ran for state representative, and I won. Turns out I beat the same guy that had defeated my dad 18 years earlier. But I've learned a lot of lessons from my dad, and one was, you do the very best you can. We certainly all make mistakes. Personally, professionally, we all make mistakes, but you do the best you can.
We're human. We're human.
A couple of other things I learned from my dad, too, is one of the things that happens in politics is if someone changes their mind, they're a flip-flop or something. He said, no, listen. The guy on the other side often has a pretty good vantage or viewpoint, and you can learn from different folks. And it didn't happen very often at all that the communities I represent are at odds. Sharon, Stoughton, I have 10 towns, but sometimes you had very valid points in opposite to each other that you have to just listen to the key points and make your own judgment. We bring to the office not only our judgment, but our kind of our life experiences. And mine
Exactly.
I'm a father of 5. I run a small business as a lawyer. I have just my own life experiences. When I was a young kid and I first get into office, I became a champion of home care for seniors. And that was because I saw the benefit that my mother derived from home care. And so in addition to fighting for money for the schools and to keep pressure off the local property taxes, I focused on issues that I saw had a direct, and I found out that we were pushing people into nursing homes prematurely. And yet, if you talk to 100 seniors, 99 or 100 would say they'd rather stay in their own home as long as they could.
Of course. Yeah.
And they didn't always have that choice. The state would say, we'd give you the support in a nursing home, but not at home. I said, my glory, if we increase home care availability, we're not only giving seniors what they want, we're saving money. It costs far less to provide those services. So all of this, I think, comes back to a very good example, an eloquent example set by my dad and by my parents, and so it helps inform my actions even to this day. I hope and pray that someday my kids say the same thing about me, but they're not at that stage right now.
Well, Brian, I'm 78 years old, or 78 years young, and I kind of always tell it like it is. And I knew that people who work for the government, people who work for the town, it's a job. They always depicted the DPW as 4 men and 2 shovels. And that's wrong. These are people who are trying to earn a living. And they say, well, this one is a politician, or that one is a politician. But it's in a good sense that you have performed. You can't say yes to everyone. If you yesed everyone and everyone wore the same thing and said the same thing and did the same thing, what a dull and boring world this would be. But you tell it from the heart, and that's what was always important to me. And I remember that for our community of Sharon, who did well by you, and the town of Stoughton, where my business was for so many years, were well served by you being in public office.
Thank you. Let me just tell you, mention another thing. So in the budget, in that $38 billion, we focus on, education, but not just for, primary and secondary school. We really put a focus on early childhood education because there's such a payoff when we get children at a younger age. Is actually a greater bang for the buck. But we also continue to invest in the public universities and then workforce training for the older folks. So education's always a big part. The roads and bridges we mentioned, a lot of the initiatives that you've come to expect. But we had something different this year that there's a real big focus on and a growing awareness and that is the extraordinary public health crisis that's impacting really every city and town in the state, if not the nation, and that is the opiate addiction, the opioids that are just devastating so many families. So in this budget, we took a significant step, I think, to try to provide more support for families in needs, families in crisis. But we did something else more recently, just a couple of weeks ago, because when you think about providing help for someone who's already injured, I liken it to once someone's gone off a cliff to having an ambulance and a bed down at the bottom for them. But boy, wouldn't it be great if we could keep them from going off that cliff? So we just passed some legislation to try to really stem the tide, to get to children earlier in the schools and have screenings that would identify a likely candidate for addiction, and to try to provide education and avoidance. And it's funny, here in Stoughton, there's a wonderful person who runs a program called Oasis, which is doing exactly what I described, keeping, in fact, apparently the drug use in Stoughton, against all evidence of activity in other cities and towns, has gone down through this early intervention. Another area, Norman, I've become increasingly concerned about through the years is mental health, which is often intertwined with the drug addiction as people self-medicate. My father told me when he was a kid that people were sometimes ashamed to talk about cancer, which I found that startling. So in my lifetime, we've been afraid to talk about mental health issues, and yet they impact 1 in 5 of us. So that 1 in 5, 20% of our citizens have a mental health issue. And we did pass legislation a few years ago, both in the state and federal level, to require parity. What that means is insurance companies had to afford the same coverage for mental health ailments as they did for physical ailments. That's terrific, but what I've found is there's no teeth in the enforcement. There's really little enforcement mechanisms. So I've been pushing to stiffen the enforcement and allow even a private cause of action so as to ensure people get the treatment that for these biological illnesses that they need and deserve.
Well, there are so many people, and the older you get, you begin to realize it's not a perfect world, and everyone is affected by something. And who really doesn't? You say 1 in 5. From a humanistic point of view, I think there's a hell of a lot more that could use some counseling.
Sure.
And it's nothing to be ashamed of. Like in years ago, you couldn't discuss alcoholism. Oh, it never happened. Cancer, I remember, when I grew up, don't even say the word. Yet there's more that the state, that the people in the communities need.
Well, one of the things we're looking into now, so I mentioned, I actually was the sponsor of this legislation a few years back called the Equal Choice Bill that gave people, our seniors, a choice to stay in the comfort and dignity and safety of their own home for as long as possible without being forced into an institutional setting prematurely. Similarly, now we're taking a look at our criminal justice system, where certainly we need to incarcerate violent criminals. Certainly we need to keep people safe on the streets. But we have now a history of jailing addicts, and at an extraordinary cost. We have the highest, by far, the highest percentage of our population in prison. And again, many for no violence or no, you say almost victimless drug usage.
The drug
so
usage,
so
yeah.
and yet we can provide treatment far cheaper. So it's more humane, and it saves the taxpayers money. So we're looking at kind of reinventing justice in this state. Again, nobody's going to be soft on crime, on violent criminals.
Of course not.
But we're incarcerating people for years and years for a drug addiction, which is an addiction. And I think we're going to be talking a lot about that in the next year or two.
What goes right along what you said, it was several months ago that I interviewed right here. I hosted a program with Bob Stoughton, who headed up the DEA for New England and New York. And he was saying, and what he said, and I kind of grasped that, and I started to worry about myself. I put my own personal self into it. As you get older, how many pills a day does a senior take? And doctors tend to prescribe too many opiates, and it causes one hell of a problem. And you hit the nail right on the head that this is what's happening. Bob Stoughton told it like it was, and you pick it up here, and we're no different in Massachusetts than we are in the other states.
I talked to a kid the other day who, at 19, had injured his knee playing hockey. He had a knee replacement, and he said the doctor gave him a prescription for 60 Oxycontins, and 40 Percocets after that. Now, he needed some pain medication, but probably for a few days, I don't know. And he told me that of his 8 closest pals, this group that he grew up with, he said 6 now had a drug addiction, or had gone through it. And a lot of times, it's not bad kids. It's a man or woman who may have been given a prescription and became addicted. So one of the things we did in this recent legislation is we're pushing to allow the pharmacists to be able to partially fill and let people know, hey, we're going to give you 3 days worth of this drug, and and to give some options. But it's just startling to me how freely these addictive medications are still prescribed. You mentioned how many prescriptions are people. I read a stat. I can't swear this is accurate, but I read a stat. I think the average American, never mind average senior, is taking about 6 medications a day. I mean, we have a lot of pills. We're 5% of the world's population, and 80 to 85% of the opioid prescriptions.
And you know what happens. And let me speak from my own case. I had 2 hip replacements, rotator cuff surgery, and they were given these drugs. Percocets, oxycodone, what have you, Tylenol with codeine or whatever it was. And what happens is you take them for a couple of days and you end up leaving them in the medicine chest. Now you have kids in high school, friends come over. Where's the first place they're going to look? Sometimes you're not home, you don't know. Years ago, one day, I just couldn't take it anymore. I took everything and just flushed. What in God's name am I saving these things for? And this is what you find in a lot of homes.
Sure.
People come in to repair
things. It happened
things.
here in the Stoughton Housing Authority.
Yeah.
It happened. I'm a volunteer board member on a nonprofit senior housing facility, and just, I think, 2 days ago, we had a camera, and we caught a worker going into a senior's apartment and stealing prescriptions. So, but it's an addiction. So anyhow, I mentioned that we're, I think of it as 3 components of the job. So the societal issues that impact everyone in Massachusetts, and this is one that we're really working on. We mentioned the budget advocacy for Stoughton, and the third part I want to talk a little bit about too is just working for the people that I represent. In other words, if somebody calls their senator or sends an email, whatever the issue, I know it's important to them. And so we try to be responsive. you can't always solve people's problems, but a lot of times we can help cut through the red tape and try to get an answer for someone. So I take that very seriously. I'm going to ask Roy if he'll put my contact information up on the screen.
That'd be
so
great.
that people can feel free to reach out to my office. And there it is. It's Senator Brian A. Joyce. My email address is brian.a.joyce@state.ma.us. Telephone number 617-722-1643. If you need to call me at home, you can. I'm in the book. But it's really an honor to help people.
That has always been, your mission and your forte. I think we just got a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to know how can you speak about the current state of the Commonwealth's economy, the unemployment rate, and job creation? What's happening there?
Well, this is good because we're getting to the end, and every story should have a happy ending.
Yeah.
So the good news is, our unemployment rate now is 4.6%. It's a full percentage point lower than it was this time a year ago. So, it's not great if you're part of that 4.6%, but it's lower than the national average. It's clearly a sign of an improving economy and an improved economy. And the forecast now is that the next 2 years will continue to be strong years in Massachusetts. We have a lot of job growth in healthcare, in life sciences, biotech, in universities. We've had a pretty robust economy, and it seems to be getting stronger. As a result, tax receipts are up. We're able to fund programs, and even we expect another income tax cut to be triggered by these increased revenues. So things are looking good. It always could be better. Tip O'Neill said the three most important things about politics are jobs, jobs, and jobs. And, we continue to try to look for ways to create jobs. And, whether, working with the selectmen, the state was able to help attract Amazon here to Stoughton. And they're going to have all kinds of seasonal jobs.
Of course.
There was a hiring preference that we pushed for Stoughton residents. That also brought a lot of tax revenue into the state. But we're continuing to invest in education at all ages. Early education, we have full-day kindergarten, helps prepare the children to grow up and compete in what's now a global economy. They could just as well be competing with someone from around the world as someone from across the state. And at the same time, we have to recognize that taxpayers work hard for their money and to be prudent with our expenditures. So it's a balancing act. We do the best we can. As my father said, you do the best you can, and then you go to bed.
That's all. Well, it's coming into an election year, obviously, next year, and I don't know what your decision is going to be, but from the bottom of my heart, I hope you stay on.
Oh, I will. I will.
And continue to
God
run.
willing, if the voters will have me,
Exactly.
at least another term, maybe two. But it's a great job. I'm in a position now to get things done, and it's an honor. I never forget the honor to work in the Massachusetts State Senate, where John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Calvin Coolidge, and a lot of very distinguished and capable men and women today work.
But I can speak from experience, as I said, and I tell it like it is, and you're there for the people, and you're there for the people of Stoughton, and this is the program this evening, and it's just a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Norman. So Roy's given us the hook. Roy, I just want to be clear. I want this guy with me anytime I speak publicly from now on.
I'm an old man.